Far be it for me to stand from in between everybody and going home, right? And being the last speaker is always a great honor. Whoever is left gets the prize of getting to hear me, but also, well, I have a tendency of seeing the room clear out, but we'll take that as it may. But just like Father in church, why does everybody move off? Come on, let's fill in the seats here. Let's not make you feel so alone. Those of you in the back, come on, take a seat, move on up. One or two. Let's stay awake. It's the last one. Fantastic. Thank you. Is anybody online? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Wonderful to be here. So imagine, if you will, we've had some really fantastic presentations. And imagine this. You are out here on beautiful Long Island Sound, carrying cargo on your schooner, moving at a nice clip at 10 to 12 knots. It's a beautiful day. And bam, at 140 knots, a winging ground craft comes flying right by 30 feet over your mast, noiselessly powered by battery technology. This is the future we're actually looking for. Sustainable energy, sustainable movement of cargo and passengers. We've talked a lot about the wonderful technology and work being done with sailing vessels. Last year, I had the honor of presenting on training characteristics of what that might look like. This year, I'm going to talk to you about winging ground craft. This work actually comes from my work with Regent Craft in Kingston, Rhode Island, where I've been able to work with them the last 2 years or so, building a training program. So let's first talk about what it is. What is a winging ground craft? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Is it a boat? Yes. Okay, simple answer. They are considered by the International Maritime Organization, the U.S. Coast Guard, the Singapore and Korean maritime authorities to be a watercraft. They are not a seaplane. Okay, so let's specify here the difference. They are not a plane. They look like a duck, but they don't walk like a duck and talk like a duck. Okay, they are a watercraft as according to the rules in most regulated organizations. Okay, they operate primarily on the water. So they work by overcoming the lift versus drag ratio, same as a plane. The difference is beneath the airfoil, number one, outflow of air, but beneath the airfoil is a cushion effect. Now, this cushion effect was first discovered by Orville and Wilbur Wright in their early flights, known as the pancake effect, okay? They did not quite understand what they had discovered in this. Why? Because they just discovered flight, so we'll give them a pass. But early pilots discovered this effect upon takeoff and especially during landing, that when their planes were angled just right, there would be a cushioning effect. We've come to know this as the ground effect. In essence, ground effect generates a rise in the lift over drag ratio in a three-dimensional wing on a flat plane over land or water. So although we are here primarily focused with the aspects of takeoff and landing and operations over water, there are certainly aspects of this technology that can be used over land. The limiting factor is, of course, you are only flying 1 to 2 wingspans above any surface. So if you're doing this over land, so much as a tree or two in the way will really ruin your flight path. Therefore, water has been the primary method of research, but there have been experiments in places such as Mongolia, with the large steppe being nearly flat, except for grass, highlighting the fact that this effect does work over land. Okay, now current wing and ground craft are designed for this. Unlike early airplanes, which discovered this, wing and ground craft or ground effect vehicles are designing with this in mind. Okay, there is the theory, and it's been proven in some scale, that ground effect vehicles can carry a greater load than an equivalent sized airplane, moving at nearly the same speeds, but much closer to land. Why is this? Because underneath the airfoils, as we talked about that pancake effect, it generates a cushion. So they are flying still at 140 or so knots, but because they're closer to the ground, there is less fuel consumption. Okay. They're obviously traveling faster than a traditional high-speed craft on the water, which we'll see going at around 50 knots, 40 knots. So as I said, they rely on a flat surface to fly upon. So early research by Regent, Aaron in South Korea, the Flying Ship Company of Virginia, and one or two others have been doing their experimentation in sea states of no more than 3, Beaufort scale of 3, meaning, 10 knots or so of wind, low sea state. Why? For takeoff and landing. Because all of these craft, once airborne, are not beholden to necessarily the sea state. They do have to take off and land on the water. And it would be very bad PR if they go to land and pitch pull over. So we're trying to avoid that. But DARPA, which the Defense Research Project Agency, I don't remember the whole acronym, has actually called for research into wing and ground craft that can take off and land in greater sea states, plus get higher above the water, much akin to the earlier Soviet Caspian Sea monster, which we will talk about. Okay? So, this is not a new technology, right? As stated, this effect has been known for quite some time. One of the earliest proponents of designated wing and ground craft technology research were the Russians and the Germans post-World War II into the Cold War era. All right, the Russians developed the Caspian Sea monster, which was this. Still sits on a beach to this day doing a whole lot of nothing. But this proved that the technology works. We did not get to see how far this could go due to the collapse of Soviet-era Russia and the financial repercussions of that. The vessel has now sat ruinating in some beach somewhere. However, the Russians did prove that this technology can be scaled up and used. It's now just a matter of deciding what we're going to do with it. Okay? Currently, there's a lot of studies in automation and battery technology aside from wing and ground craft. So what we are now seeing is wing and ground companies are transitioning that research into their current technology. Now, primarily for defense. Right now, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy of Iran has quite a small fleet of ground effect vehicle vessels being used armed with 2-man crew. The Polish military had announced several years ago that they were researching autonomous wing and ground craft to be used as what they call screen planes or surveying vessels, right? To look for threats before they arrive without putting people in harm's way. They travel fast. They travel low to the water, which means they are flying under the radar, but they are traveling over sonar mines, sonar detection systems. They are perfect for reconnaissance. They are perfect for military insertion applications, which is where a lot of research into this is being done. How can this be leveraged to take X payload or X number of persons and deposit them onto an enemy beach? However, that is not just what we're looking at. This is the Iranian fleet of WIGs as has been photographed that we know of. Okay. Now, although there has been an expressed military interest, there is a lot more to this, much like Stephen Wood's example of a route to Martha's Vineyard. Well, you take a 12-passenger, 18-passenger wing and ground craft from Block Island to Martha's Vineyard to New York. You're traveling at 140 knots. Now, so granted, when we look at the price of a ferry from, let's say, Long Island to Block Island, you're paying $25, $30. You're not going to get a ride on one of these for $25, $30. You will get a ride on them, though, for a lot more. But that will serve a market. This would also be great in applications of traveling small payloads out to localities that do not have a firm infrastructure. These can basically take off and land from the water and almost be beached up to a floating dock. So when we look at the infrastructure necessary for one of these craft to operate, it's low infrastructure, much less than a traditional ferry or a small freighter, right? We can land these next to the beach, hydrofoil in, hydrofoil out, take off, land, whatnot, with very little assistance from shore. All we need is to float a dock out to unload people and or cargo. Okay. Now, one of the drawbacks we currently have, no training model, right? Because this technology has not been in use, so to speak, in the civilian market, there is no model as recognizable as STCW that we use for our licenses. But because these are considered craft that can transit internationally, I can take this from Maine to go up into the Maritimes in Canada, 180 nautical mile range. I can do an international route on this. There's no standardized training program. What would that look like? Am I a pilot or am I a mariner? Right, we have to ask ourselves these questions. Well, the answer is going to be you're a little bit of both. What would that training look like? We would have to take a look at, first off, the high-speed craft code by the IMO. So the high-speed craft code has outlined specifics, things such as route specified training. Much like a normal high-speed ferry would have, the operator must be familiar with that specific route in order to operate commercially. But because of the aspects of flight, any operator would have to have a basic understanding of flight. Airfoils, lift over drag, landing, takeoff distance, landing distance, etc. We would have to be able to look at that, plus use predictability of weather for sea state takeoff and landing areas. Will it be safe before we venture out? Anybody who has a private pilot's license knows before you take off, you look at the weather of where you're going. Can you actually fly there under visual flight rules safely? Or will you be violating the scope of your license while trying to fly? The same is going to apply here. We're also going to have to look at things such as bridge resource management. When we take a look at the traditional bridge resource management on a vessel, you're moving at what, 20, 25 knots. Here, you're moving at 140 knots. So how will the aspect of another closing ground effect vessel at 140 knots, so a closing speed of 280 knots, that does not give you much time to react. So how does high-speed bridge resource management work in scenarios like this? How will we look at obstacles on the water? Stepping stone light. Well, I know it's coming up. I see it on my radar. Is there a vessel there? Should I fly around it? Should I go above it? What am I going to do? And working with a two-person bridge team versus where on a ship coming in and out of port, you will likely have more. Here you'll only have two. What will be the zones that we're allowed to operate in? Right now, there's no designated area that the Coast Guard has said, this will be an operating zone. This will be for takeoffs. This will be for landing, right? All the rules of the road say is a seaplane and a wing and ground craft shall not operate near other traffic. As these vessels become more prevalent, that will not necessarily be an option. There will have to be designated takeoff landing areas for this to work. Otherwise, traffic will be running into each other literally. But this is all going to fold into part of the training that we have to look at in the future. Right now, the only country that has a operational wing and ground craft training facility is South Korea. with the Aron wigs. Now, I was not able to get in touch with them for this presentation. I never heard back, but considering they have not made many waves on the news, I don't think they're doing too much. Hopefully someone from there watches this and reaches out and proves me wrong. Why wigs? Why now? Right? Like I said, this technology's been around a while. So what makes it special now? If we take a look at the model for the flying ship company of Virginia, they're going autonomous to semi-autonomous to fully autonomous craft, meaning that there will be people operating these remotely, so B, less chance of risk, but able to carry larger payloads because you're not dealing with the carriage of my fat butt sitting in a seat. Okay, if we take a look at the Regent model, we're looking at a complete battery operated craft, right? Zero emissions, 100% green, in line with the future that we've been talking about here today. So the movement of autonomy, battery technology, infrastructure into these craft are making a revolution in how we can see and use them in the future. Okay. There will be more research. As more are built, we'll discover new and interesting ways of using them, just like a resurgence in old technology of sailing, right? We now see thicker hull automatic sails on board cargo ships. Ask somebody that 70 years ago if they'd see that. No, sail is done. They've been proven wrong. So all we have to do is wait and see with time what is actually going to come out. There is research, there is interest. South Korea, Singapore, Poland, Iran, Russia have all shown varying degrees of interest in this technology. What is going to be the economic use of it? We'll see. Is it going to be military? Is it going to be civilian? I like to think it's going to be a little bit of both. But time will tell what will prove to be the most economic benefit as this technology takes off. Right? And questions.